So today we're going to take a look at two parables that Jesus told right after talking about how nobody knows the day or the hour of his coming, that is his parousia, his appearance. And in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus did give a sign for his arrival, his appearance, his coming onto the scene, his parousia, and that was the sign of the sun going dark, the moon turning to blood. This is all prophesied in the Old Testament scriptures, and all of these cosmic signs are connected with the day of the Lord. So when Jesus told his disciples that the sign of his coming was these cosmic disturbances, he was in essence connecting that sign with the day of the Lord. So the day of the Lord is not the tribulation. The day of the Lord is when Jesus is going to personally arrive on the scene, make his presence known. And he first does that by appearing in heaven. Then you'll see the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. The sky is going to roll back like a scroll. Heaven is going to be revealed. That is the heaven where God dwells. And people are going to see him. And this is spelled out a little more clearly with the sixth seal of Revelation, where it says that the sun goes dark, the moon turns to blood, the stars fall from the sky. The sky is rolled back like a scroll. People see Jesus. That's the sign of his coming. That's the sign of his imminent arrival prior to the day of the Lord. So many people teach that the day of the Lord is something called a 7-year tribulation, and it's not. The day of the Lord is connected with the kingdom. And the sign for the coming kingdom is all those cosmic disturbances that we see in Matthew 24 and again with the sixth seal in Revelation. Now, here's my understanding of the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. I've talked about this many times, that they are simply lists of events. There is a seal list, there's a trumpet list, and there is a bowl list. And where many people have made the mistake of reading Revelation as though it were chronological, and they see that all the seals have to happen, and then all the trumpets, and then all the bowls. And that's not how it works. And we make these connections in other ways. So we know that the sixth seal is connected with the sign of the Son of Man. And Jesus tells us in the Olivet Discourse exactly where that is. That is sometime after the abomination of desolation, after the tribulation of those days, when believers who are present on earth at that time are going to undergo terrible tribulation and persecution. It's for their sake that the days are cut short, and they're going to be brought into heaven. They have their own rapture. This is the beginning of the day of the Lord. And the day of the Lord is associated with the coming, or the parousia, the personal presence and arrival of Jesus as King. Once the tribulation of those days is cut short, that's when the wrath of God begins. That's when the day of the Lord starts. It starts out with darkness and not light. And then once Jesus has his glorious return, he judges the fallen angels. He gathers believers from one end of heaven to another. His angels are sent out to do that. The gathering and the rapture, two different events. Now, most people, again, who teach about a rapture teach there's only one. The book of Revelation teaches three, and it doesn't teach a rapture of a bride. There is only the rapture of sons. Okay, only the rapture of sons, groups of sons. The firstborn, the male child who's caught up to God and to his throne, that is not Jesus. That is those who are going to share Christ's rule, who are raptured into heaven. Jesus never was raptured. Okay, Jesus ascended, totally different word. This is not about the life of Christ. This is about believers who will be taken into heaven before the seals are opened, right? The next group is the 144,000 of Israel, who will be taken before the hour of trial that comes on the whole earth, and that is a literal hour. All time in Revelation is meant to be taken literally, all of it. Half hour of silence in heaven, hour of trial. It's a literal hour. It's not figurative. 1,260 days, literal. 3.5 days, the two witnesses lie dead, literal. all time is literal. And when we understand that that's the case, all of a sudden the whole book opens up and we can actually use these literal time increments to help us understand the end times, help us build a sequence of events. And I mentioned in my other videos that if it weren't for the book of Revelation, the only rapture that actually makes sense is the pre-wrath one. All right, the pre-wrath one. But because we read Revelation, we also see a pre-seal rapture. And then we see something happening with the 144,000 somewhere around the middle when the beast begins to reign. So these three different raptures, the pre-seal, the ones that happen before Christ takes the scroll, that rapture of the male child, the rapture, what looks like a mid-trib rapture right around the time that the two witnesses are brought into heaven. And then there's this one right here. When you think there should only be one rapture, well, then you have to really twist the scriptures to make things fit. I don't have to twist anything. I don't have to torture any text to make it confess to something it's not saying. It's all very clear, especially if you started with the first video in this series. What the disciples were asking prior to Jesus' Olivet Discourse was, when are you coming? Is there a sign for your coming? And they also wanted to know about the temple, when that was going to be destroyed. Jesus never really addressed that part, but it is addressed in the book of Daniel, where the angel Gabriel told him that after Messiah is cut off, the temple would be destroyed. So that actually is stated in the book of Daniel. We're going to talk about the fig tree generation in another video. And in this one today, we're going to talk about two parables, and they are connected parables, but because of chapter divisions in the Bible, we tend to break the Bible up into these sections of chapters. And so there's always this break in our mind that the action is changing because we've gotten to a new chapter. That isn't how the Bible was written, and in a lot of cases we should ignore the chapter divisions and just read the text sort of smoothly on through so that our thought process isn't artificially interrupted. So today we're going to take a look at a couple of parables that talk about this rapture right here. So the two parables that we want to look at today is the parable of the faithful and unfaithful stewards and the parable of the 10 virgins. They go together. So let's take a look at Matthew 24. We're going to look at verses 45 through 51. And this again is not talking about us or our rapture. This is not about believers who are living now. This actually is directed toward believers who will be living just prior to the sixth seal events, just prior to the day of the Lord, just prior to the sign of his coming. And they will have a rapture event all of their own. Okay, so here's what it says. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? So during these last days, during the reign of the beast, when the woman's other offspring are going to be here, when they are Christ's servants, they're true believers, and some of them are going to be assigned to feed the other servants. Verse 46, blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. So when we talk about food, we're talking about spiritual food. We're talking about Christ's faithful servants who will be living during that time, who will be encouraging and feeding their brothers and sisters, especially the older believers who've been around for a while. They're going to need to encourage the younger believers, those who are younger in the Lord. Verse 47, truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. This is the faithful servant, the faithful steward who provides food, spiritual food for other believers just prior to this rapture right here. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with the drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day he does not expect, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. And in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So this is about believers who live just prior to the coming of the Lord at this third rapture event here. They're the ones who are saying there's a delay. My master is delayed. They stop serving Christ faithfully. And in fact, they actually become abusive. They become abusive to their fellow servants. And in fact, they start hanging out with people that they shouldn't be hanging out with. And here those other people are defined as drunkards. You can either be filled with the Spirit or you can be filled with alcohol. And it says that the master of that servant will come on a day he does not expect, and at an hour that he does not know. This is interesting because in the book of Revelation, it would seem that there is an hour that this rapture will take place. It's going to happen in an hour. Remember, time in Revelation is literal. And so when we read the letter to the church of Sardis, Jesus said that he would come at an hour that they wouldn't expect. And again, in Revelation 14:14, the angel comes out of the heavenly temple and brings a message to Jesus, the one like a son of man seated on a cloud, and said, the hour to reap has come. Here it says, the master will come at an hour he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. This is where it's important to understand that what we do as believers matters. How we live our life matters. We could say, well, I'm a Christian, I'm saved by grace through faith, I can't add anything to it. And granted, that's true. You can't add anything to our initial salvation. But once you're saved, it's expected now that you will serve Christ faithfully. And those who do not serve Christ faithfully, it's not like they lose their salvation, but they lose their position. Okay, they lose their position. And these people, believers who act faithlessly, who abuse their fellow brethren and start hanging out with drunkards, they will not be watching. They won't be watching for the master to return. In fact, it seems like they have no expectation that he will come back. And when the master does come back, it says they're going to be cut in pieces and put with the hypocrites. It doesn't say, oh, you're saved by grace. You're okay. You're okay. I guess you'll lose some rewards here. No. What it says here is that he's going to be put with the hypocrites, the play actors, the ones who pretend. In that place, there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So this third rapture that these people could go in, they're not going to go in. When the wrath of God starts to be poured out, they're going to be here for it. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. They're not going to be taken. Just like the 144,000, if they're not faithful, they're left behind as well. God takes it seriously that we follow him and serve him faithfully, that we persevere and endure. We can all, say that we're a child of God and we're, saved and all of that. But if we don't live for him, if we don't walk in the power of the Holy Spirit, in the end, you end up with the same thing that the hypocrites have, the play actors and the pretenders. And in that place, there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's important to understand this is a parable, it's a story, and it's illustrating the need for faithful living for believers who are going to be here during that time period. People who will be undergoing persecution, people who will be in tribulation, believers who will have, some of whom will have been believers longer and need to love and support their fellow believers and feed them their food in the proper time and not beat them. Okay, so the next parable is the parable of the 10 virgins, and the story is the same. These are believers who are going to be here during the time of tribulation, waiting for the Lord to come. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. Okay, this compares to the servants who are faithful and faithfully give the food to their fellow servants at the proper time versus the unfaithful servants. Okay, in this case, we have 5 wise virgins and 5 foolish virgins. What Jesus is saying, and what he's going to say in this parable of the 10 virgins, which most people are familiar with, is that you have to be watching. You have to be faithfully persevering and watching. Wise virgins watch. Okay, faithful servants serve faithfully. Foolish virgins aren't prepared, and unfaithful servants don't watch and aren't prepared. It's the same theme that's going through both of these parables. And the parables don't necessarily apply to you and me because we're living prior to this time period. And hopefully we'll all go in the first rapture of the male child who's caught up to God and to his throne and then appears as the 24 elders before Christ takes the scroll. So let's go back to the parable of the 10 virgins. 5 of them were foolish, 5 were wise. For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them. That is so silly. But the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps, and as the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept. But at midnight there was a cry, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "Since there will not be enough for us and for you, go rather to the dealers and buy for yourself." And while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. And afterward the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered, "Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." So it's the day or the hour of what? When the day of the Lord is about to come. Jesus is going to come and get these people. They have to be ready. They have to be waiting. They have to be faithfully serving the Lord. We have to be faithfully serving the Lord. If you want to be a firstborn son, have all the privileges of a firstborn, the double portion, the ruling and reigning, the being a priest and a king, you have to be faithful and you have to persevere. Both of those things. The unfaithful servant was unfaithful and is going to be left right here. He'll be left to endure the first part of the day of the Lord when the wrath of God is poured out in the 7 bowls. Then you have the parable of the 10 virgins. They are people who are going to be here during the time of tribulation. Okay, it doesn't say anything about tribulation in either of these passages, but we already know that that is what's going to be happening from what Jesus said earlier. The tribulation of those days, and the tribulation is applying to believers. Watch my previous video on this. This is not 7 years of the wrath of God being poured out on unrepentant humanity. That is not what is being spoken of here. In either Matthew or Revelation, the tribulation pertains to believers who are going to be undergoing persecution during the reign of the beast. People have to be faithful. They have to be prepared to persevere to the end. And that's the problem with the 5 foolish virgins. They didn't prepare themselves to have to endure. And you can't pull on somebody else's perseverance or endurance. You can't use somebody else's faith resources. You have to have your own. And the foolish virgins didn't have what it takes. And they didn't plan for it. The wise ones planned that they were going to persevere and that they would be ready to go when the time came. And even though both groups were asleep, once they were awake, the group that had already planned that the bridegroom would come and that they would be going to the wedding supper, they just got ready and left. And the other group didn't. You have to be ready. If you're living during this period of time, you have to be ready and you have to be faithful. So both of those are parables about nobody knowing the day or the hour and about being ready. And this applies to the people who will be living during the reign of the beast, people who will be here after hopefully you and I are gone. So let me know what you think. We'll see you on another video. Till then, have a blessed day.